Sean Stone's scream echoed through the hospital hallway. For 18 years, the Marine general's son had lived in total darkness. His father, a man who'd never lost a battle, had flown in experts from 12 countries. Millions of dollars spent. 73 specialists failed. Then Melinda walked in. She was a rookie nurse, just 3 weeks out of school. Every doctor told the general to fire her. But they didn't know she had seen something in Sean's eyes that every elite expert had missed. With one simple medical tool and a risk that could end her career, she was about to change everything. If you believe one person can change the world, hit that like button. If you're watching this, may you not miss the opportunity you've been waiting for. Subscribe and comment Amen. This is the miracle that silenced the hospital. Sean Stone had never seen his father's face. He knew the shape of it from touch. The strong jaw, the slight ridge of a scar above the left eyebrow from a deployment before Sean was born. The way his father's breath changed when he was worried, the particular silence that meant he was watching. But seeing, that was a language Sean had never learned. At 600 hours every morning, the coffee maker beeped 3 times. Sean measured his world by sounds like these. The creak of the third step from the bottom. The hum of the refrigerator that meant the kitchen was awake. The soft click of his father's boots crossing the threshold from the hallway. "Morning, Sean." The general's voice came from exactly where it always did. The doorway, 7 feet to the left, waiting. "Morning, Dad." Black 2 sugars. Sean held out the mug. Their fingers touched as his father took it. Calluses. Always the calluses. Hands that had held weapons and written orders and carried fallen soldiers. Now they held coffee brewed by a blind son who refused to be a burden. "You're going to make me predictable," the general said, settling into his chair. The left side creaked. It had creaked for 18 years. Sean smiled. "You made yourself predictable the day you decided to never give up. Routine keeps you sane. Structure prevents chaos. Your words, General." He heard his father's breath shift. A laugh, almost. General Marcus Stone didn't laugh often. He commanded. He planned. He fought battles that couldn't be won and called it duty. Sean's fingers found the Braille reader beside his plate, an article on neuroplasticity. He was 3 semesters into a psychology degree at Georgetown, taking every class through audio and touch. His professors said he was their top student. He told them he had fewer distractions. It was partly true. "What's today's reading?" his father asked. "Neuroplasticity in sensory-deprived individuals," Sean said, his fingers gliding over the raised dots. "Turns out my brain reorganized itself. My visual cortex processes sound and touch now. I'm basically a superhero, Dad, just not the kind with a movie franchise." The silence that followed was heavy. Sean felt his father watching, the weight of a gaze he'd never seen but always sensed. "You are remarkable," the general said. Sean's fingers paused on the page. "I'm adapted. There's a difference. Remarkable is a choice. Adapted is just what happens when you don't have options." He finished his tea, kissed his father on the cheek, prepared for another day of the life he'd built from 18 years of darkness. He had no idea that in a few hours, a rookie nurse would walk into his hospital room and change everything. Melinda Harris checked her reflection one last time, 24 years old, nursing degree, 6 weeks out of school, first day at Walter Reed Medical Center. Her hands were shaking as she pinned her name badge to her chest. The laminated card felt like both an achievement and an imposter's costume. The senior nurse at the station, Patricia Monroe, glanced up from her paperwork. 23 years at Walter Reed. Gray hair pulled back so tight it looked painful. "You're the new girl, Harris, right?" "Yes, ma'am." "You'll shadow Nurse Chin today. Don't touch anything. Don't suggest anything. And for God's sake, don't try to impress anyone. We've got actual doctors for that." Melinda nodded. She followed Nurse Chin through the ward, fetching supplies, observing procedures, asking careful questions that were answered with varying degrees of patience. The doctors didn't make eye contact. The other nurses offered polite smiles that didn't reach their eyes. At 10:47, Patricia called her back to the station. "We've got a VIP patient in 347, General's son, 18 years old, congenitally blind, here for yet another consultation that won't change anything." She handed Melinda a tablet. "Your job is simple. Keep him comfortable. Make sure he has water. Be polite. Don't engage in medical discussions. The specialists handle the actual medicine." "Yes, ma'am." The general is military royalty. His son has been seen by every specialist worth their degree. Whatever you think, you set it aside. Your job is to not make waves. Understood? Understood. But an hour later, sitting in the empty staff lounge scrolling through Sean Stone's medical file, Melinda felt something unsettling taking root in her chest. The file was massive. 18 years of consultations, 73 specialists, hundreds of tests and scans and evaluations. She read through examination notes from doctors whose names she recognized from textbooks. She reviewed diagnoses written in technical language she had to look up on her phone. Congenital optic nerve hypoplasia, bilateral, complete, irreversible. Every specialist agreed. Every test confirmed it. Every conclusion was identical. But Melinda carried a secret, a memory from when she was 9 years old, sitting in her mother's small clinic in rural Georgia, watching through a doorway she wasn't supposed to be watching through. Her mother, Dr. Sarah Harris, a country doctor who treated farmers and factory workers, examining a woman who'd come in complaining of cloudy vision. Melinda remembered her mother's hands, steady, certain, working with an instrument that looked too simple for the miracle that followed. She remembered the woman's gasp, the tears, the way her mother had smiled and said something about membranes, about how sometimes the simplest problems hid behind the most complicated symptoms. Melinda closed the tablet. The memory was 15 years old, softened by time, possibly distorted. She'd never asked her mother about it. She'd filed it away as one of those moments from childhood that seemed significant but probably wasn't. Except now, reading about Sean Stone's eyes, something about that memory was surfacing, pushing against her consciousness, a recognition she couldn't quite name. It was probably nothing. She was a rookie nurse 6 weeks out of school. What could she possibly see that 73 specialists had missed? But the memory wouldn't settle. It kept circling back, insistent, uncomfortable. Melinda stood up, smoothed her scrubs, walked toward room 347. She had a job to do. Keep the patient comfortable. Don't make waves. Don't overstep. She could do that. She would do that. When Melinda walked into room 347 at 12:53, carrying a fresh pitcher of water and wearing her most professional smile, she had no idea that the next 7 minutes would change 3 lives forever. Sean was sitting by the window, his face turned towards sunlight he couldn't see but could feel. He looked younger than 18, dark hair, Georgetown sweatshirt. His eyes were open, unfocused, moving slightly as he listened to the world rather than watched it. "Hi," Melinda said softly. "I'm Melinda. I'll be your nurse today." Sean turned toward her voice and smiled, not politely, genuinely. Finally, someone who doesn't whisper. "Do you know how exhausting it is when everyone treats blind people like glass?" They talked while Melinda checked his vitals, about his psychology degree, about nursing school, about the bizarre assumptions people made. Sean was sharp, funny, disarmingly honest. This wasn't VIP patient and rookie nurse. This was just 2 young people finding unexpected connection in a sterile room. The door opened. General Marcus Stone filled the doorway. His presence didn't require a uniform, though he wore one anyway. Ribbons spoke of decades. His eyes found his son first, assessing, protective, then moved to Melinda with evaluative precision. "General Stone," Melinda said, standing straighter. "I'm Nurse Harris." He nodded once, economical, tired. Up close she could see what rank tried to hide. 18 years of exhaustion, lines around his eyes, gray at his temples. weight that had nothing to do with military service. "The specialist will be here shortly," he said. "Dr. Morrison, highly recommended though they all are." The resignation in those last words broke something in Melinda's chest. Dr. Morrison arrived 20 minutes later, mid-50s, confident, thorough. He examined Sean with professional efficiency, reviewing scans, murmuring technical observations. Melinda stood in the corner doing what she'd been told. Stay quiet, stay invisible, don't overstep. But when Dr. Morrison stepped back, when Sean sat patiently with his unseeing eyes reflecting overhead lights, Melinda found herself moving forward. "May I?" she asked, gesturing toward the penlight. "Standard nursing documentation." It wasn't standard, it wasn't necessary. But Dr. Morrison shrugged. Sean said, "Sure, why not?" And suddenly, Melinda was standing there with a penlight, her heart hammering. "Look straight ahead," she said softly. "This might be bright." She adjusted the ophthalmoscope, peering into Sean's right eye. And saw it. A thin, translucent layer, cloudy, irregular, sitting on the retina surface like a veil over something that should be visible underneath. The room tilted. Melinda was 9 years old again, hiding behind the door of her mother's clinic in rural Georgia. Mrs. Henderson from the school cafeteria sat in the examination chair, describing how everything had gone foggy. Her mother examined Mrs. Henderson's eyes with this same ophthalmoscope, made a small sound of recognition, said something about an epiretinal membrane, a thin layer of tissue that clouded vision like plastic wrap over a lens. Melinda remembered watching her mother explain the procedure. "Simple," she'd said. "Delicate but simple." 20 minutes later, Mrs. Henderson was crying because she could see the clock, could count her fingers, could see her own reflection. "Just a membrane," her mother had said afterward. Sometimes the simplest problems hide behind the most complicated symptoms. Sometimes you just have to trust what you see over what you're told you should see. Melinda moved to Sean's left eye, needing to confirm, praying she was wrong, terrified she was right. The same cloudy layer, the same translucent veil, the same correctable, treatable, reversible condition that had nothing to do with optic nerve hypoplasia. Sean Stone had membranes covering his retinas, membranes that could be removed, membranes that 73 specialists had somehow, impossibly, missed. Melinda stepped back. Her hands were trembling, her heart was racing. She knew what she was seeing. But if she was wrong, if her childhood memory was distorted, she'd lose everything. Her job, her credibility, her career before it started. And if she was right, 73 specialists would be proven wrong. The general's 18-year war would have been fought against a phantom enemy, while the real one sat visible, removable, fixable this entire time. She needed to tell someone, had to speak up. But who would believe her? Dr. Raymond Kellerman was reviewing patient charts at the nurse's station when Melinda found him. 52 years old, chief of ophthalmology at Walter Reed for 11 years. His reputation preceded him like armor. He trained at Johns Hopkins, published in every journal that mattered, consulted on cases that made medical history. Melinda's hands were still shaking when she approached. "Dr. Kellerman, I need to speak with you about Sean Stone." He didn't look up from his tablet. "The general's son is being handled by Dr. Morrison. If there's a comfort issue, address it with the senior nurse." "It's not a comfort issue. It's medical. I examined his eyes. I saw." Now he looked up. His expression wasn't angry, just mildly surprised. The way you'd look at a child who'd wandered into the wrong room. "You've been here for what, 6 hours, and you examined a patient's eyes." He set down his tablet. "Did Dr. Morrison request your clinical assessment?" "No, but—" "Then why exactly were you performing an ophthalmological examination?" The nurse's station had gone quiet. 3 senior nurses stopped their work, listening. Patricia Monroe's expression said, "I warned you." Melinda forced steadiness into her voice. "I saw something, a cloudy layer on both retinas. It looks like an epiretinal membrane, I think." You think. Dr. Kellerman's voice remained calm, which somehow made it worse. Let me understand this correctly. You, a nurse with 6 weeks of experience, examined a patient who's been evaluated by 73 specialists over 18 years, and you believe you've identified a condition that every single one of them missed. I know how it sounds. Do you? He stood now. The shift in posture changed everything. This wasn't a doctor humoring a nurse anymore. This was hierarchy being enforced. Do you know how it sounds to suggest that specialists from Boston Children's, Johns Hopkins, Tokyo University Hospital, physicians who have dedicated their entire careers to ophthalmology, all somehow overlooked a basic membrane? Do you understand what you're actually saying? I'm saying I saw something that matches. You saw what you wanted to see, or what you think you saw based on inadequate training and dangerous overconfidence. His voice hardened. Sean Stone has congenital optic nerve hypoplasia. It's been confirmed by 73 independent evaluations. The diagnosis is not in question. What is in question is your judgment. Melinda felt heat rising in her face, but she held her ground. Dr. Kellerman, if there's even a possibility. There isn't. He picked up his tablet again, a gesture of dismissal. This is a teaching moment, Nurse Harris. Medicine is not about hunches. It's not about what you think you remember from wherever you trained. It's about evidence, expertise, and understanding your limitations. Your limitation is that you are a rookie nurse. Stay in your lane. But Melinda didn't move, couldn't move, because she kept seeing that cloudy layer, kept remembering Mrs. Henderson counting her fingers, kept hearing her mother's voice saying, "Trust what you see." With respect, doctor, I know what I saw, and if I'm wrong, you can fire me. But if I'm right and we do nothing. If you're right, Dr. Kellerman's calm finally cracked. Do you have any idea what you're suggesting? The liability alone, claiming we missed something for 18 years. The professional implication, he stopped himself. When he continued, his voice was cold precision. I'm going to say this once. You will not discuss this theory with anyone. Not the patient, not his father, not your fellow nurses. You will continue your assigned duties without overstepping again, or you will leave. Those are your options. The silence that followed felt like suffocation. Dr. Kellerman pulled out his phone, typed something quickly. Conference room B, 15 minutes. I want the senior staff to hear this directly so there's no confusion about protocol moving forward. Patricia Monroe's expression shifted from vindication to something almost like sympathy. The other nurses found reasons to be elsewhere. Melinda understood with sudden, crystalline clarity what was happening. Dr. Kellerman wasn't just dismissing her. He was building a case. When she walked into that conference room, she'd be facing 5 senior physicians and the hospital's chief administrator. She had 2 choices: back down and survive, or stand her ground and risk everything she'd worked for. The conference room meeting lasted 43 minutes. 43 minutes of medical hierarchy explaining to a rookie nurse why she was wrong, why she was dangerous, why she needed to understand her place. They didn't fire her. Worse, they humiliated her with patience, as if she were a child who needed correction rather than dismissal. Melinda walked back to room 347, with her career hanging by a thread and her conviction somehow stronger. Sean was alone, sitting by the window again, his fingers tracing patterns on the armrest that only he could feel. "Hey," Melinda said quietly. "Hey yourself, you sound different, bad different." Melinda sat down in the visitor's chair. Something about Sean's easy honesty broke through her professional composure. "I need to tell you something," she said, "and I need you to listen." She told him everything: the cloudy layer she'd seen, the memory of her mother's clinic, the meeting with Dr. Kellerman, the dismissal, the humiliation. Sean listened without interrupting. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. "You're telling me," he said slowly, "that 73 specialists might have been wrong, that there's something on my retinas that can be removed, that I might actually be able to see." "I'm telling you what I saw. The rest is whether anyone will believe you." Sean turned his face toward her voice. My father's been fighting this war my whole life. He's never stopped looking for an answer. If you tell him what you saw, your father will have me fired. Or he'll finally get the answer he's been searching for. Sean reached out and found her hand. His grip was firm. Tell him. General Marcus Stone stood in the corner of Sean's room, arms crossed, listening. His expression was unreadable. Melinda had just finished explaining everything. The cloudy layer, the memory, the dismissal, the risk. The silence stretched. 73 specialists, the general said finally. His voice was quiet. 18 years, millions of dollars, and you're telling me a rookie nurse with 6 weeks of experience saw what all of them missed? Yes, sir. You understand how that sounds? I do, sir. You understand that if you're wrong, you'll never work in medicine again. I understand. The general walked to the window, stood with his back to her. Sean sat motionless on the bed, his unseeing eyes turned toward his father. Dr. Kellerman was specialist number 48, the general said quietly. He examined Sean when he was 11, spent 3 days running tests, wrote a 30-page report confirming optic nerve hypoplasia. He told me there was no hope. He turned around. But he also wrote something else, a single line, mild vitreous opacification noted. He saw something. He just didn't know what he was seeing. Melinda's breath caught. You've seen the file, the general said. Yes, sir. And you still believe what you saw? I believe Sean has epiretinal membranes. I believe they can be removed. And I believe if we don't try, he'll spend the rest of his life in darkness that could have been light. The general studied her for a long moment. Then he pulled out his phone. I'm calling Dr. Kellerman, he said. We're going. Melinda's breath caught. You've seen the file, the general said. Yes, sir. And you still believe what you saw? I believe Sean has epiretinal membranes. I believe they can be removed. And I believe if we don't try, he'll spend the rest of his life in darkness that could have been light. The general studied her for a long moment. Then he pulled out his phone. I'm calling Dr. Kellerman, he said. We're going to do this again, and this time he's going to look for what you saw. Dr. Kellerman arrived at Sean's room 40 minutes later. His expression was professionally neutral, but his eyes carried yesterday's resentment. Behind him stood 2 surgical nurses and the hospital's chief administrator. The general didn't give him time to speak. You're going to examine my son again, General Stone said. You're going to look for epiretinal membranes, and if you find them, you're going to remove them. General, with all due respect, that's an order, doctor, not from the military, from a father. Kellerman's jaw tightened. He looked at Melinda. Something flickered across his face. Resentment, yes, but also something else. Recognition, maybe, or the beginning of doubt. Fine, he said. I'll examine him. He positioned the ophthalmoscope. Sean held perfectly still. The general stopped breathing. Kellerman examined the right eye, then the left. His expression remained neutral for the first 30 seconds. Then something shifted, a slight widening of his eyes, a pause in his breathing, a stillness that spoke louder than words. When he finally pulled back, his voice carried the careful neutrality of a man confronting something he desperately didn't want to admit. There are membranes, he said quietly. Bilateral epiretinal membranes, extensive, long-standing. He looked at Melinda. In his eyes she saw something complex, professional respect grudgingly given, personal frustration at being wrong, and beneath it all the weight of 18 years of misdiagnosis. Nurse Harris was correct. The general dropped into the chair beside his son's bed. His face was pale. His hands were shaking. Can you remove them? The general asked. Kellerman hesitated. Then, yes, I can. The surgery was scheduled for that afternoon. Melinda wasn't allowed in the operating room, but she stood in the observation gallery with General Stone, both of them watching through glass as Sean was positioned under surgical lights that made him look impossibly small. The procedure unfolded with mechanical precision, tiny instruments entering Sean's eye through incisions barely visible from the gallery. The membrane appeared on the overhead monitor, a translucent layer that had robbed Sean of 18 years of sight, now magnified to fill a screen. Undeniable, removable. Beginning membrane peeling, Dr. Kellerman's voice came through the speaker. Starting at the superior edge, slow, steady pressure. Minutes stretched into eternities. The general stood motionless beside Melinda, his breathing the only sign he was still alive. On the monitor, the membrane began to separate from the retinal surface with agonizing slowness. Membrane is free, removing now. The translucent tissue came away, complete, intact. Perfect removal, textbook procedure. They repeated the process on Sean's left eye. Same precision, same careful peeling, same successful extraction. When Kellerman finally stepped back and said, "Procedure complete," both membranes successfully removed. No complications. Melinda felt something in her chest release. Tension she'd been holding for what felt like a lifetime. But Sean's eyes were still closed. Bandages were applied. Instructions given. Sean was moved to recovery with his father at his side. Melinda followed, waiting for the moment that would confirm whether 18 years of darkness could truly end this simply. 4 hours later, when the anesthesia had worn off and the initial healing had begun, Dr. Kellerman returned to remove the bandages. Sean sat in his recovery bed. His father held his hand. Melinda stood in the corner, trying not to hope too hard. "Sean," Kellerman said gently, "I'm going to remove your bandages now. When I do, I want you to slowly open your eyes. Don't force anything. Just let them open naturally." The bandages came away, first right eye, then left. Sean's eyelids remained closed. Seconds passed in absolute silence. "You can open them now," Kellerman said. Nothing happened. "Sean," the general's voice carried concern. "Son, open your eyes." Still nothing. Sean's face had gone pale, his breathing shallow. Melinda suddenly understood with terrible clarity what was happening. This wasn't medical failure. This wasn't surgical complication. This was fear. Sean's voice came out barely above a whisper. "What if I still can't see? What if I open them and there's still nothing? What if hopping was worse than accepting?" His hands trembled in his lap. "I've been blind my whole life. I made peace with that. But if I open my eyes now and there's still just darkness, I don't know if I can survive that kind of disappointment." The general started to respond, but Melinda moved forward. She knelt beside Sean's bed, bringing her voice close and grounding. "Sean, do you remember what you told me yesterday, before everything happened?" Sean's closed eyes turned toward her voice. "I said a lot of things. You said you'd rather try than always wonder." Melinda's voice stayed soft but certain. "You've already been brave enough to try. Now you just have to be brave enough to know. And whatever happens, whether you see or you don't, I'm right here with you. Your dad's right here. You're not alone in this." Sean's breathing steadied, his hands unclenched. "I'm right here," Melinda repeated. "Whatever comes next, we're right here." And slowly, trembling with 18 years of longing and terror, Sean Stone began to open his eyes. Sean's eyelids lifted slowly, incrementally, the way dawn breaks over distant horizons, inevitable but achingly gradual. Light entered pupils that had never processed visual information before. For 3 heartbeats, nothing changed in his expression. No recognition, no reaction, just the mechanical act of opening eyes that had been closed for 18 years. Then his breath caught. "It's not dark." The words came out confused, disbelieving, as if darkness was the only reality he'd ever trusted, and this new sensation defied everything he understood about existence. His eyes moved slightly, unfocused, searching. "I see light," Sean whispered. "Actual light, not the idea of light, not someone describing light. Oh my God, I can see light." Melinda's own eyes filled with tears. She hadn't given herself permission to cry until this moment. "It's going to be blurry at first," she said, her voice unsteady. "Your brain has to learn how to process what your eyes are sending. But Sean, you're seeing. You're actually seeing." I'm terrified, Sean admitted. His voice was small and honest. What if this is temporary? What if I wake up tomorrow and it's gone? Melinda knelt closer, her own vulnerability rising to meet his. You want to know the truth? I've been terrified since the moment I saw those membranes. Terrified I was wrong, terrified I'd fail you, terrified I'd give you hope and then destroy it. Her voice cracked. But being terrified and being brave aren't opposites, Sean. Sometimes they're the exact same thing. So let's be terrified together and see what happens next. Sean blinked slowly, deliberately. With each blink, the world seemed to sharpen incrementally in his vision. There are shapes, he breathed. Blurry shapes, something tall to my right. Is that a person? That's your father, Melinda said softly. Sean turned his head slowly toward where General Stone stood frozen, his hand still holding his son's, his entire body rigid with the kind of hope that hurt to carry. Sean blinked again, his eyes adjusting, his brain frantically building neural pathways that should have formed in infancy but were constructing themselves now in real-time desperation. The shapes are getting clearer, Sean said, wonder bleeding into his voice. I can see edges, definition, there's a face, I can see a face. His voice rose, excitement overriding fear. Dad, I can see your face, it's blurry but it's there, you're there. General Marcus Stone, who'd commanded Marines through combat, who'd made life and death decisions without flinching, who'd maintained composure through 18 years of medical disappointments, made a sound that wasn't quite a sob and wasn't quite a laugh. His free hand covered his mouth. His shoulders shook. Tears he'd been holding for nearly 2 decades finally broke free. Sean's vision continued sharpening. Blurs became shapes. Shapes became features. Features became the face of a man he'd only known through touch and sound and the particular quality of his presence in a room. You have gray hair at your temples, Sean said, his voice filled with awe. And lines around your eyes. And your mouth, Dad, you're smiling. I can see you smiling. His own tears started then, streaming down his face as he reached up with trembling fingers to touch his father's cheek, while actually watching his hand move through space. You look exactly how you sound, strong and tired. He paused. Dad, I can see you. The general dropped to his knees beside the bed, his forehead pressed against their joined hands. 18 years of war finally ended in the smallest, most profound victory imaginable. His son could see his face. After 73 specialists, after millions of dollars, after flying to 12 countries and consulting every expert who mattered, it took a rookie nurse with a childhood memory to end his longest battle. Dr. Kellerman stood motionless by the door, his professional composure barely containing something that looked like shame. The surgical nurses who'd assisted weren't even trying to hide their tears. The resident observer had her hand over her mouth, witnessing the kind of medical moment that would define why she'd chosen this profession. Sean looked around the room now, his vision still adjusting but functional, seeing colors and faces and the mundane miracle of visual reality for the first time in his conscious memory. He saw the hospital equipment, the flowers someone had brought, the way light filtered through window blinds, creating patterns he'd never imagined. Everything is so much, Sean said, overwhelmed and laughing through tears. So much color and detail. Melinda, where are you? Melinda stepped forward into Sean's line of sight, his face transformed with recognition. You're younger than I thought, and you have kind eyes. I can see that your eyes are kind. He reached out. Melinda took his hand. 2 young people who'd changed each other's lives held on to each other while the world tilted into something new. Dr. Kellerman finally spoke. His voice was professionally controlled but carried unmistakable emotion. Sean, your vision will continue improving over the next several weeks as your brain adapts. You'll need follow-up appointments, possibly corrective lenses, time to adjust. But what you're seeing now is real. It's permanent. Sean nodded, still looking around with childlike wonder. still processing that darkness wasn't his permanent reality anymore. The hospital's official statement arrived 48 hours later, carefully chosen words that acknowledged success while avoiding the word mistake. The hospital was pleased with the positive outcome, grateful for the collaborative efforts of the medical team, committed to reviewing protocols. But what the statement didn't say, what everyone in that building understood, was that Walter Reed Medical Center had missed a diagnosis for 18 years. That 73 specialists had looked at the same eyes and seen only what they expected to see. That protocol and expertise and reputation had failed where fresh perspective and courage had succeeded. Dr. Kellerman found Melinda in the staff lounge 3 days after the surgery. He didn't sit immediately, just stood in the doorway with the posture of a man who'd been rehearsing words he didn't want to say. "May I?" he finally asked, gesturing to the chair across from her. Melinda nodded. Kellerman sat, silent for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice carried none of the condescension from their first meeting, just exhaustion and something that might have been humility. "I examined Sean when he was 11, he said quietly. "I spent 3 days running tests. I was thorough. I was confident." He paused. "And I was wrong." He looked at Melinda directly. "I saw what I expected to see, optic nerve hypoplasia. The diagnosis was already established by 47 specialists before me. So when I looked at his retinas, I saw confirmation of what I already knew rather than questioning whether I actually knew it." Melinda stayed quiet, letting him work through whatever he'd come to say. "You looked without expectations," Kellerman continued. "You saw what was actually there. That's not luck, that's good medicine." He paused, the admission clearly costing him something. "I dismissed you because you threatened my certainty, my reputation, my need to be right, and in doing so I almost prevented a miracle." He extended his hand across the table. "You were right to persist. I was wrong to shut you down. I'm sorry." Melinda shook his hand, and something in the gesture felt like the institutional hierarchy, acknowledging that credentials weren't the only measure of medical competence. General Stone found Melinda that same afternoon, still in uniform, carrying himself with different energy, lighter somehow, as if 18 years of weight had lifted from his shoulders. He didn't waste time with pleasantries. "I want to sponsor your education," he said directly. "Whatever specialty you choose, whatever advanced training you need, I'll cover it. No strings, no expectations, just gratitude for giving me back my son." Melinda started to protest, but the general raised his hand. "You risked everything for Sean, your career, your credibility, your future. You stood up to an entire institution because you trusted what you saw. That kind of integrity deserves support." She accepted, though the conversation felt surreal. 6 days ago, she'd been a rookie nurse trying to survive her first shift. Now, a 4-star general was offering to fund her future. Patricia Monroe, the senior nurse who dismissed her on day 1, approached her in the hallway with an expression somewhere between chagrin and respect. "You were right," she said simply. "I told you to stay in your lane. I was wrong. This place needs more nurses willing to drive outside their lane when it matters." The shift was palpable. Other nurses asked Melinda questions about the case. Doctors nodded to her in hallways. The rookie who'd been invisible was suddenly seen. 6 months later, Sean Stone sat in a Georgetown University lecture hall, taking notes in his own handwriting, something he'd never imagined doing when he'd started that psychology degree, navigating by audio recordings and braille. His vision had stabilized at 20/30 with corrective lenses, better than many people born with sight. He'd added a pre-med track to his coursework. Medical school applications sat on his desk at home. When people asked why he wanted to become a doctor, he had a simple answer: "Because I understand what it's like when doctors stop looking." Melinda Harris had been appointed to Walter Reed's new Diagnostic Review Committee. Her job was simple but revolutionary: Question established diagnoses when something didn't fit. Encourage staff to trust observations over assumptions. Create space for junior medical personnel to speak up without fear of institutional retaliation. She'd started advanced training in ophthalmological nursing, funded by the General's scholarship, studying under specialists who now treated her observations with respect. The General himself had written a letter to Dr. Sarah Harris in rural Georgia, a handwritten letter on military stationery that arrived one Tuesday afternoon at her small clinic. In it, he thanked her for raising a daughter with the courage to trust her own eyes, for teaching Melinda that simple solutions sometimes hide behind complicated diagnoses, for the childhood lesson that had given his own son a future neither of them had dared to hope for. He ended with a single line that Dr. Harris framed and hung in her examination room. "Your daughter gave me back mine. I will spend the rest of my life being grateful." The morning routine that had defined Sean's first 18 years, coffee at 600, his father's footsteps on 13 stairs, navigating a world shaped by sound and touch, had transformed into something new. Now Sean saw the sunrise that accompanied his coffee, saw his father's face when he descended those stairs, saw the world he'd built from limitation expand into possibility. He still touched things constantly, combining sensation with sight, his brain forever integrating two ways of knowing into one complete understanding. But the darkness that had defined his existence, that had been his permanent reality, his accepted limitation, his adapted normal, that darkness was gone. And in its place was light. General Marcus Stone had fought for 18 years to win a war everyone said was unwinnable. In the end, he didn't win it through military strategy or unlimited resources or sheer determination. He won it because one person was brave enough to see what others had missed, and courageous enough to speak. Sean Stone counted 18 years in darkness, but he'll count the rest of his life in light. Because one nurse decided that being right was worth risking everything. And sometimes that's all it takes to change a life forever. One person, one moment, one choice to speak when silence would have been easier. If you believe people like her deserve to be heard, show some support by hitting that subscribe button and joining our community. We tell stories like this every week, and we'd love to have you with us. Please like, share, and subscribe.